Hello crafting friends, this is Jessica with Tiny Worlds of Wonder, and today I'm stopping in to share my very favorite coloring medium for adult coloring books. Now I am notoriously impatient, and while I own a ton of colored pencils and all kinds of other coloring products, I keep coming back to my Inktense Pencils by Derwent over and over and over when it comes to coloring in my adult coloring books. So today I want to share with you a little bit about these pencils, some of their effects, and some of the best ways that I found to use them in my books, and then maybe give you a little tutorial about how you might get started with these if you're interested in trying them out. So I started out with this Inktense 36 set. I got these on Amazon, and I will have to check the price as it stands now, but they were not extremely expensive. And over time, I've been supplementing these a little bit with just off-the-shelf Inktense pencils from Blick, which is an art supply store online. So in the description below, I'll put a link both to the set that I have from Amazon and to Blick so that you can find these supplies for yourself. But like I said, these are my very favorite coloring tools for coloring in adult coloring books. Now here's why. I'm going to show you a couple examples of some things that I've colored with these so that you can get kind of an idea of the sort of color and depth and richness that you get with these pencils. So this is from a book called The Magical City by Lizzie Cullen. And this is Ischia, Italy. But you can see on this coloring spread, even though the paper in this book is fairly thin, I was able to get some really vivid and rich colors, which you can also achieve with colored pencils. But the thing that I love about Inktense is that because when you get them wet, they turn into actual ink, you really can get some amazing overlay kind of effects going on. So in addition to the brightness of something like this spread, I'll show you another example. This is one of my very favorite books, The Mouse Guard. I adore this coloring book. In addition to those bright colors, you can also do some really cool kind of sepia effects with these pencils. And if you can see, I have done actually some really neat shadow effects on this page because all of the colors turn into ink, and as you overlay colors, the underlying colors do not lift off. So that's one of my favorite things about Inktense, and they're really fast, which I also like. So let's get into this. I'm going to show you kind of some of the basics on how these colors work. But first I'm going to drop you a little bit closer to my work table so that you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I've just grabbed a little square of Bristol paper out of my paper crafting stash, and I just want to show you some of the basics when it comes to Inktense. So I'm just going to grab a basic red color. This one is chili red. And I'm just going to color a square here in with a single color and sort of show you how to approach these pencils. So I am going to use kind of a heavy hand out to the left side. I'm not going to stay in the lines. No staying in the lines here. And I'm going to attempt to fade this color with lighter and lighter pressure as I move to the right hand side. Now, a rule of thumb with these is the more pressure that you use and the richer the color you create, the brighter the color will be. Not just the darker, but the brighter as well. So I'm going to try to go for a really bright color here at the edge, and then I'm going to leave this side white. Now, because these are water activated, just because I'm leaving a section of my paper white does not mean it's going to stay white when I activate these. You are going to need some kind of tool to get this wet. So I prefer using a water brush These are also from Amazon. The brand is X Passion. If I can find this, I'll link it below. But Pentel and some other companies also have really good water brushes, and I have to admit, I liked my Pentel ones better that I used to have, but I wore the tips out. So I'm using kind of a medium tip. With water brushes, you just add a little water to your barrel here. I'm going to need to refill mine pretty soon. And I usually try to get my bristles medium wet. You don't want dripping, and you don't want your brush to be too dry. You're also going to need some kind of paper towel or something to use for blotting as you go along. So I usually just touch the tip of my water brush to my paper towel. If I see a little circle of water coming off, but not dripping, then I know I'm pretty well set with the amount of water that I need. So to activate this and keep this nice blend, what I'm going to do is work from the lighter side, the lighter edge, and I'm going to come in here and just dampen the edge of this color and try to pull it out to the edges. Okay, and depending on the kind of paper that you have, the color will spread more or less. My mouse guard book is a little more blendable because the paper is thicker than the Magical City, in my experience. I try not to stay in one area too long. I sort of advance and retreat a little bit. So you'll see me wetting the edge and then just pulling back a tiny bit and blending, wetting the leading edge, pulling back a tiny bit and blending. This Bristol paper is not the most porous. Probably watercolor paper would be better to demo this with, but most coloring book paper is not ideal for this. Anyway, so I wanted to show you that you really can get some effects with anything, any kind of paper that you have. Okay, so once I got to my edge here, I blended back a little bit and forward, but like I said, I try not to use too much water because usually in adult coloring books, the paper is thinner. You don't want anything coming through the back side. So you can see this is definitely most effective when we have a little more pencil. And I would say in my adult coloring books, that is also the case. So I want to show you now in this square how we might blend a couple of colors. I'm going to take my chili red. I'm going to add in a pink. And let's grab a Shiraz, which is a purpley red. And I'm going to start this time with no white leading edge. And I'm going to start blending left to right just like I did before. And I find when I'm doing coloring that I try to focus my middle color or choose my middle tone depending on what the actual color of my object is. And of course, in real life, the colors of things vary quite a bit, the undertones and the overtones. But if something is red, I might choose the true red that I see in that object, and then make that my middle tone, and then make my shadow more of a pink, and my highlight more of a pink, and my shadow more of a bluish red. So if I was coloring a red dress, for example, I might make my highlight pink or even with some leading edges of white, and my shadows with more of this purplish or bluish red. Okay, so I'm going to fade a little here, grab some more red, and I'm going to overlap my lighter color into my darker color just a little bit. Okay, and I'll do that with the pink as well. Just fade it in a little bit. Okay, now you can see the tooth of the paper shows a lot with these pencils, but as we get them wet, they're going to have a really, really cool watercolor effect, and more of that tooth is going to be covered. Now my pen has gotten wetter, which was more what I needed for my first square over there. My pen was a little bit dry. But you can see if I advance and retreat just a little bit, not too much, I can get a good blend between all three of these colors. And if I feel like I'm starting to get streaking or saturation too much or more than I want, I just blot off with my paper towel a little bit. So advance and retreat just a little bit. It's like a military maneuver. Only coloring. All right. How fun is that? So that is the basic procedure that I use with these pencils. You need enough water, and make sure you always work from lightest to darkest. If you pull from dark to light, you'll end up dragging this color over much too far into your highlight section. So that's an important tip. Now let's try sort of an actual object. I just drew a tiny bit of a leaf over here. And I'm going to grab some of my favorite leaf colors out for you. My favorite leaf colors are Deep Indigo, which is a blue, Ionian Green, Felt Green, and Tan. And I like to add a little bit of brown or tan, sometimes just to change things up a little bit so I don't have all my leaves green. So I'm going to choose a highlight point for this just at random, and I'm going to say that my highlight here, let's say my highlight is coming in from the upper left. So I'm going to leave some white area in the upper left, and I'm going to start bringing in some of this light green. Now I'm pretending this leaf is perfectly flat. If it was rounded, of course we'd need a highlight in some different areas, but just for purposes of demonstration, we're going to keep this pretty flat. Okay, and then I'm going to add a little bit of darker color here. Ionian Green has some blue to it, so it's a nice combo, I think. And of course you can use all shades of green for leaves, and the more you use, usually the better they look. Okay, then I'm going to grab some blue and color the bottom here. Now you don't always think about using blue on leaves, but for shadow, blue is a great color. Okay, and I'm just going to blend some of that medium tone back into my shadow color, and some of that lightest color into my medium color. Now the more blended these colors look on the paper, the more blended they're going to look after you wet them as well. So make sure I have enough water here. I'm going to start on my lightest edge and blend that color out into the edge. And I often leave a little bit of white, a little bit of negative space there. I'm going to work advance and retreat just a little bit to get that leading edge blended. I need a little more water here, but the thing with Inktense is once you start, you don't want to take a big long break in wetting your edge because you will get kind of a line of delineation. So if you need a little more water, finish what you're doing first and then go back and see if you can wet your pen a little bit more. If I left this now and came back to it, I wouldn't get any kind of effect that I want, in my experience. Okay, so I'm going to advance and retreat a little bit and just pull some of that color into the middle ground. Blot off a tiny bit. I have to blot quite a bit usually with my darkest color. Okay. So you can see we get a nice watercolor effect, a good blend from light to dark. If you have any spots that you're not totally happy with the blend, the downside of Inktense is you're not going to reactivate these a whole lot. If you want some kind of product that you can reactivate and keep working, you probably want to go more along the lines of Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencils or something like that. Inktense, once they're wet, they're pretty much set. So That can be hard, but it can also be amazing, because what we can do then is come back. Let's use the square. Say I wanted a big ray of light cutting through some section of my painting. What I can do is actually treat these pencils, let's see if I can get this a little wetter here, like a watercolor, and I can actually add effects over the top. So you can see that I'm getting a nice orange strip, or a sunny strip, down the center of this area. Add some sunlight over here, which can create some really cool and interesting lighting effects on your pieces. So that's one of my favorite things about Inktense. If I wanted to come back to my leaf over here and say I wanted to add just a tiny bit of tan to the edge here and just give this some variety, some more color variation, as long as my paper can hold more water, I can add more color, which makes these really, really fun and unique to use. I want to show you a piece that I'm working on currently. Of course, it's in the Mouse Guard, one of my very favorite books. I love this book so much. But I'm going to use the exact same color palette that we just used on our leaf example over there. And I'm going to show you kind of in practical application how I might use these Inktense pencils. So when I'm working in my adult coloring books, whether I'm working in like Prismacolor or Inktense, I like to start by laying in my lightest areas first, finding my highlight values, and then working into my deepest values as I go. So because on this page, I want this to look like the sunlight is coming in through this portal directly on the facade of stonework here and my leaves. I'm going to show you how I might sort of approach that. Now, with the disclaimer that I am not an artist, I'm definitely not an artist. This is just for fun. So there are many things about my coloring that I probably don't do correctly from an artist perspective. But this is sort of how I approach this. So I'm going to choose a leaf that is kind of in the foreground here, maybe some part of this little cluster over here. So what I'm going to do is leave some white area on my leading edge here where I feel like maybe the sun would hit this leaf, maybe along the edge, the leading edge, and then sort of along maybe this raised area here. And this is a very cartoonish book, so it's anyone's guess what the actual texture is of our leaves. So that was my lightest color. That was the felt green. Then I'm going to come back in with my medium color, kind of go over what I did with the felt green, just sort of along the shadowed edge, or the edge that I'm thinking is more in shadow. And then I'm going to add, because this is mostly in the sunlight, I'm not going to add too much of the deep indigo, the blue, except on the very base of the leaf, just for some interest there. So you can see I left a lot of this leaf white, actually. I'm going to grab my blotter, and I'm going to start with those white areas and just blend my green up into the white area a little bit, but it's going to stay pretty light. I like to always leave on my coloring pages some areas that are completely white, because if you look at the world around you, especially on a bright sunny day, you will see the highlighted areas are truly white. So there we go. I've got some light color there. I'm going to do the same thing on this leaf. I'm going to leave some white space on the area facing us, closest to the viewer. Come in with my lightest color, then move to my medium color and just go over a little more of the shadow there, or the side that's further from me. And then just for interest, add a tiny bit of blue. Okay, then I'm going to take my water brush, grab some color from the edge of my felt green there, and then just work up, advance and retreat a little bit like I did earlier to blend some of that out. Okay, now because this is truly ink, like I said before, if I want to add a little interest, I can grab some tan and just add a little bit of like a golden color around my edge there, and you can see right away how much more interesting that looks with just a little extra pop of color. And I can go over any of my leaves that have dried and add a little bit of that tan just for some extra interest. Now let's go over and try some of our shadowed leaves. Maybe let's go for this one that's kind of sitting in behind here. I'm going to grab my shade color, which is the indigo blue. Pull some of that color out, and of course the more heavy-handed I am, the darker that's going to be. And in my shadows, I like to be pretty heavy-handed because I want a true contrast there. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made, maybe not mistakes, I don't think there are any mistakes when you're having fun, but one of the things that I have learned about my own preferences for coloring is that I really like a higher contrast, a bigger value between the lights and the darks in my work, and the more contrast I add, usually the better I like it. So that's just a little tip. If you're afraid of adding some lights and darks, go for it. It's really cool. Okay, so you can see there, that one looks like it's recessed into the background a little bit. Let's do one more, because I want to show you how we can make one truly, truly in shadow here. Let's see if I can find one. Let's just do a little experiment with this guy. So, like I did before, I'm going to start with my indigo. I'm going to use more indigo on these that are really deeply in shadow, then move to my medium color. And for this one, I'm not really going to use any of my light color at all, even though there probably would be some here in real life. I'm going to go ahead and activate this. Okay, now I'm going to grab an even darker color. Let's see if I can find one here. I'm somewhat unprepared. This is just a little bundle of all the extra pencils that I've purchased that some of them didn't come in the original set, but like I said, I've added to my collection over time. I'm going to grab this Indian ink, which is a brownish gray. And what I'm going to do now is actually come back in and just around some of the edges of these leaves. Normally I'd save this step for a little later in the process here, but what I can do is come back in and basically darken up some of my shadows and add some true blackish gray. So it looks like some of these are really receding into the background. So I'm going to do that. I like to let my paper dry just a titch before I come back in. I'm going to come back in, add some gray, and deepen that color even more. So you can see those overlay effects with Inktense are really, really fun. They really add a lot of depth to your coloring and to your piece. As always, if you have questions, like I said, I'm no expert, but leave them in the comments below. I'd love to chat with you more if you have questions. Make sure you follow me on Instagram, where I post a lot of coloring pages. I definitely do more there than I do here. I hope you've enjoyed seeing a little bit of the process of Inktense. As always, spread some joy wherever you are, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.